Hello and welcome to our live stream, post triple header, post Brazil, pre Vegas, however you want to look at it. Season's nearly over, only 2 races to go. We know who the champions are. We knew who the champions were halfway through the year, didn't we? But anyway, Max Verstappen and Red Bull Honda powertrain or something like that. So congratulations to them yet again. Welcome to the live stream. Welcome to an opportunity to have a chat about Formula One, all the things that we know and love and perhaps don't know, or maybe don't even love about Formula One. Looking forward to getting through some of your questions and comments. I say some of them, hopefully all of them, but inevitably, I haven't managed to do that ever, I don't think, on a live stream, get through all of them. So for those in advance, if I don't get to your question, I'm really sorry. I try and do it in chronological order because I think that's probably the fairest way of doing it, isn't it? And then I always like to have a bit of a ramble myself before I start. So that's always annoying for everybody, probably. What can I ramble about this time? I've just been reading, just before we went live, I've just been reading the transcript. Actually been watching the video of Riccardo Mosconi, who's the head of trackside performance at Mercedes, giving his summary of what happened or didn't happen in Brazil at the weekend for Mercedes. Doesn't actually shed any light on anything. Mind you, wouldn't expect it to. Even if they knew, they wouldn't tell us. But it's pretty clear Mercedes don't really know why they were so slow, why their window of operation was so tiny small in Brazil. On the one hand, they took front flap off the car for the race just to try to balance the car out and immediately got understeer. That shows how tiny their field of operation is. Do we feel sorry for them? I don't know. Interesting question. I mean, so much money has been spent on that facility over the years. I know we're in a budget cap era now, but it all sort of adds up, doesn't it? Even in the budget cap era, A and B, they've had an amazing amount of success. But to see a team that successful, floundering that impressively is staggering, really. It just shows the fragility of this ground effect formula in which we are currently living. Yes, I know Red Bull, and particularly with Max on board, have found a level of consistency way ahead of anybody else. But even they had, Singapore as a bit of a black spot. Only one race though, I've got to say. The rest of it's been just mind-bogglingly good. But it is, ground effect is an incredibly difficult thing, as we're seeing. If all these teams, arguably the most technically advanced prototype operations in the world, let alone in motorsport, can't get it right on a regular basis, then something wrong. I mean, Toto Wolff, as I said in my video after the race, Toto Wolff said, after Brazil, well, it's just unacceptable and incomprehensible how we can go from being, up there in Mexico on the podium and then to being so slow in Brazil. It's just unacceptable. But of course, you've got to put things into perspective. And it was not a great weekend for McLaren, for example, in Mexico. So Mercedes were able to take advantage of that. And, P3, once one of your major midfield, high midfield opponents is out, isn't that massive an achievement. I think far more significantly, as I said after the video, I said in the video on Sunday, was that Aston Martin were absolutely nowhere in Mexico and ahead of Mercedes and not far away from McLaren in Brazil. That is more of a swing, I think. And that, I'm sure they don't know either. I mean, they'd like to think that they do, and it all comes down to hard work at the factory and the upgrades and everything else. But, whenever you see a team going up and down like that, it means they basically don't know why they are in the situation they're in. And I made this comment before. It's a Ron Toronac quote, so don't blame me for it, but I've always agreed with it. And somebody questioned it, said, well, what does that mean? Or that's nonsense or whatever. But I'm going to say it again. It's much easier to know why you're slow than it is to know why you're quick. And the proof of that is how a team can be very quick at the moment in Formula One and then just immediately fall away at the next race. And that is a truism, I think. And at least when you're slow, you've got some building blocks that you can look at. Okay, well, we were quick here, but we lost time there, degradation. We put the front flap on, then we went backwards, forwards, whatever it is. When you're quick, yep, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it's quite difficult to know why you're quick and why because you've got to work out everybody else is slow, basically. And that's another dimension, I think, to what Red Bull have achieved this year, of how they've managed not to fall into that trap of not understanding why they're quick. they obviously do know why their car's good, and they go for a balance and they go for all the fundamentals, and usually they get it absolutely right. So that's one thing. Another thing, I don't know if anybody's going to make this point, another thing, I was chatting to a friend of mine, Corey, a bit earlier about this, is that, and I know there's a reason, but I've kind of forgotten it, why the start-finish line is not on the timing line very often. And I found it, and I found it quite frustrating in Brazil when Alonso and Perez came up on the last lap towards the checkered flag. And you tend to look at the checkered flag at that moment, don't you? When there's two cars, sort of, you know, one of them's going to pull out of the tow, and one of them going to the checkered flag. And as they went onto the checkered flag, I think Perez was ahead, but of course the timing line was before the checkered flag. Now you could argue, well, Fernando knew that, and they both knew that, and that's what they were racing to. But in reality, they're just accelerating out of that last corner. Fernando doing what he was doing with the car, beautiful defence, and obviously Perez could only do what he could do at a certain moment in terms of the tow. But it was an interesting thing, and I tend to agree with my buddy, which is that I think we should go back to having start-finish lines on the timing line, so we all know what we're looking at. Or is there some reason? I'm sure Steve Nielsen, who's the excellent former sporting director of Renault Benetton, who's now at the FIA, basically running, as far as I can see, doing a lot on the sporting side, will have a perfectly good explanation of why that's not doable. I just wish I could remember what it was. I'm sure there's a good reason, something to do with safety car lines or something like that, I suspect. That was one thing. The other thing was, just all the afterglow of the whole Fernando Perez thing. What nobody seems to be saying, of course, is that Perez has never been any good in attack. He's always been, he is what he is as a racing driver. Obviously, he's very good by most standards. But if you're talking about comparing him with other excellent drivers on the grid, Max, good example, he's never been very good in attack. He's always very good in defence. He's a difficult guy to overtake, always has been, because he's so good at the way he puts the power down and his feel for traction in the back end of the car. He makes very few errors coming out of corners, and he's a difficult guy to overtake. But because he's not a short corner driver like Max, and because he tries not to be a long corner driver like, I don't know, Carlos Sainz isn't quite as long as he used to be, I think. So I should stop using him as, let's say, Yuki Tsunoda. He's not a long corner driver like Yuki Tsunoda. And because he doesn't really know what he is going into corners, apart from a late breaker who gets the car into the corner so he can get on the power, I think that's why he's not very good under attack. And he was completely confused by Fernando and what Fernando was doing with his lines, and he was V'ing the car most of the time, but protecting as Fernando would, a natural racer, as Charles Leclerc would, as Lewis Hamilton would, as obviously Max would. And Perez just couldn't do anything about it. And when he finally got past, it was such a massive thing for him that he just fell asleep. He was just like, oh, I've done it, And they just left the door open for Fernando. Massive mistake, which of course not many other great drivers would do, but I think that's what happened there. And if this battle had been Alonso Verstappen, Alonso Hamilton, Alonso Leclerc, I think we could get truly excited about it. But because it was Alonso Perez, I think we need always to bear that in mind. A and B, it's a little bit like, I don't know very few, I'm sure, of you are interested in cricket, and I haven't been following it that closely, but I keep getting these notifications on what the Australians are doing, being an Australian cricket lover, mate, yeah. And Glenn Maxwell has just hit one of the greatest innings of all time in cricket history. And I sort of thought, that's quite interesting. I'll look at that, because I'm a big Glenn Maxwell fan, and he hit over 200 or something in this limited over match. But it was against Afghanistan. Now, I've got nothing against Afghanistan, but it's not the same as doing it against England or the Windies or India. That needs to be taken into account as well. So I think we all get carried away with all these superlatives all the time. We need to keep things in context a little bit. And you can argue, so how did Lando Norris get past Fernando? What was Fernando doing when Lando Norris passed him? We don't talk about that pass very much, do we? Pretty good. Into the first corner, Lando, thank you very much, of the first start. Brilliant, in fact. So, please advise. And those things we just sort of skirt over. And I suppose this all boils down to, I think these days in Formula One, and the way we watch Formula One, it's all geared towards massive moments like the last two laps of the Perez-Alonso thing. It's not geared towards the technology, the ongoing suspense, the strategy, all the things that I have to say I find quite interesting, and that is what Formula One is for me. And then occasionally we have these little sort of bursts of excitement, but they've got to be the right drivers doing the right thing, you know. So that was one thing. There's one part of my rant. And another one is I was absolutely gobsmacked, to be honest, after the race to start seeing emails about how Haas are looking to get the FIA stewards to review other drivers in the US Grand Prix in Austin who may have used track limits and weren't penalised. I thought this is a bit rich, coming from a team where the two drivers have basically crashed into one another and triggered an accident into the first corner, which is a billion times worse than using a little bit of track limit in Austin. Okay, I know one of them has a fixed penalty and the other one is in the hands of the stewards, and obviously nothing happened in this case as far as I could see. It was a first corner accident and it was just written off that way. But if you were Alex Albon, sort of minding your own business, you wouldn't feel too good about that. Equally, Oscar Piastri or Daniel Ricciardo, you know, who were innocent bystanders as well, and their races were ruined. So I just think, you know, I suppose what I'm thinking is I wonder what the other teams think about Haas doing that after all the damage that was triggered in Brazil. Quite a lot of damage, actually. It all comes out of the budget cap, doesn't it? Anyway, there's some thoughts to be getting on with. Let's get down to, and it's the first time I've done a live stream for a while, and I've modified things a little bit since we last, terrible thing for Peter Windsor to have done since we last did one. Why was that? Why have I, because I've had some problems with the suite, the edit suite thing, OBS, and I think I've got it right, but I'm not 100% convinced that I got it right, and I haven't really had it. There is no chance to really test if I've got it right until I actually do go live and actually do it. So here we are going live now. Let me have a look and see what's going on. Right, let's make sure. I was in a bit of a rush as well before we came down here. So I think, you know, oh, that doesn't work very well. This is what I knew I was going to have to do on the first one. I hadn't taken the trouble to size this up first. So bear with me, everybody. Don't get too panicky. Don't give me a hard time. I know what I'm doing here, I think. There we go. I'm going to make it a bit smaller. This is from Frank. I think Red Bull will struggle with the cool temperatures. I think Ferrari will be strong. I think you're talking about, I need to go back to Red Bull because obviously, sorry, to Red Bull, to YouTube, just to see. I think I didn't get the top of that. Oh, that is there is. You must be thinking about Vegas. So let's assume you're talking about Vegas, which is good. I think if the temperatures are down in the 5, 6, 7 degrees centigrade, it will be a problem for everyone. Big problem. That's the softest tyre Pirelli have got, which is good, I guess. But at the moment, around the time of practice and the race, it's about 12 to 15 degrees. But some locals are saying, oh no, but you know, some locals are saying, that was about parking in Alicante, where I've got to leave the car a couple of days when I go on a trip. But I think, you know, if it is that cold, it's going to be a problem, isn't it? Not quite sure why all the races are in that time of the night. I suppose it's because I haven't been reading all the press releases about Vegas, but seems a bit odd, doesn't it? I feel a bit sorry for the Vegas fans. I mean, they all used to being, I suppose they are. You know, if you go to Vegas, I suppose they're up all night, are they, playing the old poker machines? But I don't know, it seems odd. But anyway, I think Ferrari will be strong. Yeah, I mean, let's have a look at the Vegas track. How's this for preparation? Let's see if this works. There you go. Vegas track. Lots of straights there, aren't there? I was talking to a couple of engineers today, and they all said, yeah, you know, Monza spec almost in terms of wings, downforce level. A lot of straights there. So on that basis, not just because Ferrari went well at Monza, but because, as we know, Ferrari pretty good in a straight line, pretty good high-speed braking, pretty good functional race car, assuming they're reliable. And so, yeah, they should go quite well around Vegas, I think, is the answer to that one. So thanks, yeah. Right, where are we going now? Sorry, getting a bit confused here. Where's YouTube gone? All right, as you can see, I haven't done this for a while, have I? I've just been been too busy on other stuff. That's my excuse. Yeah, right, Windsor. Golf, tennis, a bit of golf. Right, put this one here, get rid of that. Now, see if we can get this pretty near, rapidly, quick. There's another one that's much too big. Yeah. Sorry. Now this is a bit of a mess, and I know what's happened here. Here we go. I'm going to have to do another. For those of you that are saying, "Oh, this is all rubbish," what's Windsor doing? I think just bear with me. Bear with me. It's only the second one I've done since I've gone live. Here we are. That will work. To me, it seemed that Perez constantly screwed up in turn 2 and 3 in his fight with Alonso, losing just too much ground there where Alonso did it perfectly. Your view? It's always difficult when you're looking at two cars together and one of them goes into a corner and you think, wow, he's caught him under brakes, and then you see the other cars accelerating out and the other one, there's quite a big gap. It's usually just the way it works out in terms of who's accelerating and braking at any given moment. And yeah, I mean, Alonso's a faster racing driver than Sergio Perez. I mean, nobody's ever doubted that, have they? And he's very, very good. And I think the Aston Martin was possibly a more drivable, chuckable car than the Red Bull. And Fernando was making good use of that. But more importantly, because the Red Bull was a little bit on the edge in terms of tyres, in terms of balance, then Perez is not going to be the driver that's going to get the absolute maximum from that car. He's going to drive a little bit within what he knows the car can do. And I think that's what we saw, to be honest. I just think we saw Perez doing a Perez job in a slightly imperfect Red Bull. And the reason I say that is because, and I made this point again in the video, when Lando set fastest lap, normally Max would respond, and he didn't. Don't even go there, because they were pretty much on the edge at Red Bull. The McLaren was a good car. I mean, for Max, I think more than anything, this highlighted the quality of Max's drive, that he beat Lando Norris in a very, very good McLaren. I think the McLaren was probably the best car in Brazil. And if that's the case, and the Red Bull's not let's say the Red Bull's at 90% rather than 95%, then Perez is the guy that's going to feel that more than Max Verstappen, for sure. And I think that's what we saw also in that battle with Fernando. But well observed, good point. While I've got this question up there, I'm just going to change the this is really asking for trouble now, isn't it? I'm just going to try and do something with the font, because I really want it to be I want it to be bold. Where's the thing for that? You see, when you have to change everything, it here we go. Hang on, and we are bold. Can we get bold oblique? That's what I want. You have to reset everything. So I'm sorry about that. That we're doing it now. I think we're kind of somewhere dancing with the music a little bit. I know that one's not quite right in terms of size. Okay, let's go to the next one. Back here. So thank you very much for that. Where are we? Here we are. Right. This chat thing drives me up the wall the way it's laid out. Right, here we go. Go back into OBS, text. Get rid of this. Put it up here. There we go. Right, finally got the questions to look quite good, I think, after all that. Third time. Aditya Burley. Hi, Peter. What do you think about the idea of having a separate sprint championship with sprint races happening in reverse championship order? Should be a question mark there, which I've taken out. We can have some meaningful rewards for it as well. Well, do we want to? I mean, what's wrong with Formula One at the moment? We've got plenty of good stuff going on, and I just don't see the need for that. I see a much greater need for a B Division World Championship for a lot of the young drivers who can't get into Formula One, for a lot of the countries that want to be in Formula One and can't get into Formula One because they don't have quite enough money or they don't have space on the calendar, having a B division world championship below the A division. I've always said that, and Bernie and Max never wanted to talk about that because they always felt it would detract from the big picture. But I think Liberty have a slightly more Catholic view of things, and that's where we should go. I think that the bigger problem is not the racing in Formula One or the interest in Formula One. The bigger problem is all these young drivers that aren't in Formula One, some of them representing countries that would do a lot for Formula One. India, very good example. So I would much rather, if we're going to do something quite radical, I'd much rather we did that. We've got sprint races. I don't even like the sprint races. I don't even like DRS, let alone sprint races. And that start having reverse order races. Sorry, not my deal at all. Regardless of what order you're putting them in. So I can understand that some people would think, let's make it more and more exciting all the time. Have Max at the back of the grid all the time. Wouldn't it be great? But that's, to me, that's not motor racing. That's not what I'm interested in, and I wouldn't be happy with that, to be honest. But thank you very much, Aditya. And he's just going on from that, saying, for example, the top 5 in the sprint championship can have big cash prizes, of which half is pledged to a charity of their choice at the end of the season. FIA Gala. Well, yeah, again, I think we don't do enough with the drivers. Again, I'm not for that idea at all, but I do think we should do more of that sort of thing. And I've said many times, I think the top 3 in the World Championship should do a world tour, should be forced as part of the Concord Agreement to have to do at least a 3 to 4 week world tour in the closed season in the key areas in which Formula One races or wants to race in the future, raising money for charity, doing big events, karting, whatever it is. And we should be doing that. I know it's really not what you're talking about at all, but that's what I think we should be doing. Those two things are much more pressing in my view. Here we go. There's another good question coming up, I think. Well, they're all good questions, so thank you very much for those. I wouldn't in any way say that they weren't. You're right, get rid of that one. Just trying to get all these lines to be at a length that it fits into the space of the thing. And you know what I'm doing here. Ikena Okiwi. Hi Peter, we have immense reliability in Formula One. Kudos to the engineers, but I think the pinnacle of motorsport is not pushing the limits anymore. Tyre, engine management, everything should be on the limit. I'm not sure Ferrari would agree with you right now about your reliability. I mean, Carlos Sainz had a hydraulic failure in Friday in Mexico, didn't he? And then both of them had dodgy, well, they were moaning about the clutches. I don't know if they weren't clutch failures, but maybe they'd changed the settings on the clutch or something. So that wasn't right. And then what happened to Charles Leclerc? Okay, well now we can say, going into that very quick right-hander, the engine seized on the formation lap. The power unit seized. Nothing to do with an hydraulic failure. I mean, what Carlos felt was just a back end locking up, and that's why he went off. And he naturally concluded that it was something to do with the transmission, which therefore would have been hydraulics. But it was the engine seizing. Can you believe it? On the formation lap. So I wouldn't just say, we have unbelievable reliability in Formula One right now because, look what can happen to Ferrari. Why that would be, I mean, we're at the end of the season. Obviously, we're right on the limit in terms of the mileage on the engines, and George Russell had an engine problem as well in the race. It was the last race for that engine. So I think we are right on the limit, to be honest. There is an argument almost for backing off a little bit and giving them another engine to run in the course of the season rather than keep getting tighter on it. But and I'll tell you something else that struck me with those shots of Charles Leclerc walking back to the garage, and at one point he was having some sort of discussion about whether he could get a lift, I think. Anyway, there's lots going on, but helmet on still, walking back to the pits. Now, I know not all of you were around in the older periods of Formula One, But I can tell you now, very, very often after something like that happened, you would often see, in the older days, you'd often see drivers walking back and you think, oh great, he's going to jump into the spare car. And I just for a millisecond, when I saw Charles walking back, I thought, oh yeah, great, he's going to get in the spare car, first corner shunt, mega, what a great result. And then I thought, oh no spare cars. I just think, what is this? It's a terrible thing, I think, that we don't have spare cars. And I made the point to Max Mosley in a press conference at Monaco when he first announced that they were going to ban spare cars in Formula One. I said, look, there are many other ways of saving money. This one hurts the fans, it hurts the show. It actually doesn't save the money that you would think, because it's all part of the operation that the team has to have at the track anyway. And he just rubbished me, admittedly, in front of about 150 people, so I didn't really have a rejoinder then. I felt a bit embarrassed. I'd asked the question. But I still think it's a crying shame we don't allow spare cars in a situation like that, because that's exactly the situation in which Charles Leclerc could have got into the spare Ferrari and and could have got racing. So it's a massive shame. And I think we should be thinking about that. We should be thinking about the cost implication of that versus other ways we can save money in order to have that sort of net solution, if you like, in order to go back to having spare cars, because it's robbing the fans of, watching. There were a lot of Ferrari fans in Brazil, and none of them got to see a lot of Charles Leclerc fans, actually, by the look of it, and none of them got to see him race. What's that all about? I think that needs to be changed, and I'm probably the only guy in the world saying that. But I used to manage a Formula One team, in which we had 3 cars, two races and a spare. And the spare car had its own team of mechanics but it didn't have its own engineering team. I know things were smaller then, but all you do is mirror on the spare car what one of the 2 cars is doing. So if it's Red Bull, it would be Max's car, obviously, and Ferrari, probably they'd take it in turns. But even then, you'd be ready to put in seats and pedals quite quickly, or seat anyway. And it's doable. It's not that much more. I really don't think it is. And everybody's, obviously that it means more power units, but everything would crank up a little bit, but not massively so. And not, if you take the amount that it would crank things up in terms of cost as a factor of, I don't know, the total cost of all the motorhomes they have at the European Grand Prix, I bet you it's a lot smaller. So that's what I would like to see. Not quite sure I got onto that tangent, but anyway. It was all the Charles Leclerc reliability thing. Yeah. So anyway, for Ferrari fans out there, let's hope they're not entering a sort of world of unreliability that Ferrari have known in the past. As I said in the video after the race, in the old days, it was mostly related to the strikes in Italy in the summer and the ongoing impact it had on suppliers and parts and so forth. And I think these days is much, hopefully no strikes, and B, there are so many good proprietary parts anyway on the car and standard parts that it shouldn't be an issue. But it's a little bit of a worry, I'd say, if you're Ferrari right now, about reliability. Kurt Borman. Hi Peter, given the long straights in Las Vegas, could the Ferraris be in with a shot at victory? What's your take on the Alonso Red Bull rumours at this stage? Would he give Max a run for his money? Well, I think Ferrari have got an opportunity to do very well. Whether they'll beat Red Bull in a situation where it's a completely new circuit that's relatively cold ambience and track temperature, we're assuming, it's a bit much to say another Singapore could happen, I think, but I'm pretty sure they'll be up there and anything could happen. I mean, if Red Bull have a bad weekend, Ferrari could very well win it. Yes, absolutely. But I've said before, I think Ferrari will go well in Vegas. I think the circuit is made for them. I think it was fairly predictable that after that race, a lot of people would be saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if Alonso was in a Red Bull and we had alongside Max Verstappen? I mean, my only answer is that Red Bull had an opportunity to sign Alonso when he left Ferrari, and I think Alonso was very confident that he was going to get the phone call, and he never did. And that's because, as I understand it, Marco and I guess Christian think Alonso can be a divisive character in a team. his personality and the forcefulness of his personality. And that's not what they want from Max Verstappen Formula One team. They want a compliant number two who's not going to rock the boat too much, which they kind of have with Sergio Perez, you know. So on face value, I can't imagine that Red Bull would think of signing Alonso to put him alongside Max Verstappen, as much as the fans would like it. But then again, all these fans clamouring to see Alonso in a Red Bull and clamouring to see Alonso in something really good, championship-winning car. Where were they 4 or 5 years ago when Alonso was in the wilderness doing nothing? I remember doing several videos about how good Alonso was, even though he was sort of running at the back of the field in the McLaren, Honda and things like this. And people would say, oh no, he's finished, he's hopeless, why is Windsor going on about Alonso? Now, he's the, you know, after Brazil, he's the new magic man of the moment. Everybody, this is the trouble with this hashtag trend, isn't it? Everybody just jumps on a bandwagon in Formula One without having the longer term view. I'm not saying Alonso doesn't deserve it. All I'm saying is, all these people that are raving on about him now, where were they 5 years ago? That's the point. And, well, it is a point, that point. The point. And so I don't think, but let's talk hypothetically, because you have asked a question there. At this age, would he give Max a run for his money? Answer, no. Not only because of his age, but I don't think he's technically as good as Max over one lap. And I don't think, therefore, he would be able to make up in the race situation that difference, even if he is possibly a slightly better race driver than Max, which is a debatable point anyway, because Max is so good at using all the variables well and keeping the car square and nice on the road, regardless of what's going on, whether it's crosswind, degradation, understeer, oversteer. He's, you know, vibration, brake problems. He still keeps the car looking as if it's $1 million. And Fernando can do that as well, absolutely, but in a slightly more flamboyant way, where he has to get on top of the car, he has to jig the car a bit, getting into the corner. He'd probably be harder on tyres than Max, I suspect. So I can't imagine that, obviously, in the same way Perez has beaten Max once or twice, or Massa beat Michael, and Rubens beat Michael. I can't imagine that he wouldn't beat him periodically, but over a season, no. And that's what you mean by run for the money. I don't think he would. No, I don't think it's anything to do with age, though. I think Alonso's as good now as he was back in the old Flavio Briatore Let's Go training in Kenya days, isn't he? I think he is. He's very fit. Does a lot of cycling, a lot of karting, a lot of this, a lot of that. He's got a good trainer. Very, you know, doesn't have much else going on in his life apart from motor racing. I don't say that superciliously. I say that because some drivers of his ilk do have distractions and think about what's coming next. And Fernando isn't. I think he's just pure racer, isn't he? He gets out of bed in the morning, wants to go racing. Carl Jeevers. Hi, Peter. Thanks for your time and knowledge once more. Would you agree that Max has matured greatly as a driver, but also in his attitude, manners and tact, showing in his instant radio reply saying, "We did it"? Yeah, I do think he has matured. I mean, we're seeing him through rose-tinted glasses this year, aren't we? Because there's not much for him to be upset about, let's face it. We don't really know what the new mature 2023 Max would be like if he was massively under pressure and there were 2 races to go and he was 27 points behind Perez in the championship or something like that. I don't know. You know, maybe we'd be seeing a different Max, but it's not to detract from the way he is. He comes over as a guy, he doesn't say that much anymore, and he's just calm and gets on with the job and doesn't want to get involved with too much. And I think that's wonderful. And it's good to see. I think he's always good in those pre-race things. He doesn't have a headset on when they're trying to play the national anthem. He doesn't fidget. He's calm, he's respectful. And he does a good job after the race. You know, he doesn't want to say too much, doesn't want to give too much away. And when he explains something and then the interviewer asks exactly the same question about what he's just been explaining, he doesn't say, well, I've just said that. He's nice to the interviewer and repeats it all. And so, yeah, I think he's a very good world champion in terms of representing the sport. It's not to say Lewis wasn't either. I think Lewis was and still would be. And I think Charles Leclerc would be. But I think Max, of course he's matured. Of course he's matured because he was so young when he was first successful. And B, he's been around a long time now in Formula One racing terms. So, yeah, no, I think he's brilliant. And he handles the team well. He occasionally gets a bit wild, doesn't he, on the radio, gets a bit annoyed. What is this rubbish I'm having to deal with? It's interesting. Most of it is cockpit-related stuff. I think I made this point before. I'm not sure we hear all the radio broadcasts, but we certainly, I think, do hear Max complaining more about cockpit comfort things, whether it's some buffeting he's getting under the helmet, or it's something around his legs, or something on his back, or something doesn't feel right. It's because he's such a field driver. It really is. I mean, it's as simple as that. And he's a joy to watch. And to me, that puts into context this stuff about, you know, we've got to have these massive dramas and overtaking to make Formula One worthwhile. The reality is, just watching Max Verstappen, for me, is almost enough, really. Almost, not quite. But, you know, he's really good to watch. Where are we? A bit confused again. Windsor, confused. Actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a slight, not break at all, I'm not going away at all, but I'm going to do another bit of my pre-race preparation, if that's the right word. Talk about preparation. I prepared on all the things that I enjoy, but didn't do any of the things that I should have done. So, Nasser Hamid is a good friend of Peter Nygaard, who's one of my best friends. Well, I'm best friends, but he's a good friend as well. Great photographer. And you often see me in my videos crediting Grand Prix photos, which is Peter Nygaard's website. And it goes back a long way. Really, he's got a pure racing heart. That's why I love Peter. And he's one of the few photographers out there that hasn't yet sold out to one of the great conglomerates. And that's another reason I respect him a lot. Anyway, Nasser Hamid has done a 2024 calendar based on some of Peter Nygaard's best photographs. And here I am. This is nothing to do with money at all. This is just that I think this is a really nice calendar. Really good people have produced it. And the details of how to get it are in the description below this video. Suffice to say, it is www.saison73, saison, the French word for season, number 73.com. And it's also a very good opportunity. I'll show you, it's a British, it's British drivers. So the cover of the calendar is this, which is a lovely shot, isn't it? This is just a bit of an opportunity to show some nice photographs in the middle of this live stream, and maybe to trigger a few memories from various people. That's Lewis, Brazil 2018. Lovely shot. Thank you very much for that one, Peter. Right, I'm going to go now. Okay, I'll go up. Nigel Mansell. That's no number on the car, so he's testing. That's testing Estoril, and that's 1990. Great. Look at the nose of that John Barnard. Well, John Barnard stroke Enrico Scalabroni, Ferrari, 642 by then. Really nice car. Nigel looking great in the car. Estoril, circuit I miss a lot. Portugal, love to see them. I know they've been there with Portimao, but it's a shame we don't have Portugal on the calendar right now. Again, I'd love having races in Portugal. Always got a lot of history there as well. Jackie Stewart, look at that. Mossport 73 in the Tyrrell in the wet. Fabulous. Didn't win that one, but that was the chaotic race in which the first ever safety car was deployed, which was the Porsche 914. Pretty cool car, actually, to have as a safety car. But it came out in front of the wrong driver, i.e. Howden Ganley in the ISO Marlboro. And in the end, the race was won by Peter Revson, even though in the McLaren, second win for Peter Revson, even though Jackie Oliver in the shadow thought he'd won it. So change of era, change of photography, black and white, obviously. This is, not all these photographs are Peter Nygaard's. They're photographs that he's loved and purchased the rights to himself and put on his site. That's another reason he's such a great guy. Tony Brooks. What have I got there? Yeah, I've got Tony Brooks in the Ferrari 1959 German Grand Prix at Avus, winning with Dan Gurney in the other Ferrari right at the beginning of his Formula One career, flying in the Ferrari. And P3 going into the chicane there. Would you believe in that Cooper, factory Cooper? Didn't have many drives for the Cooper factory team, but Maston Gregory right up with them in the early laps. And that's an aspect or a view of Avus you very rarely see. There's a famous shot of Avis, which I'm sure many of you seen, which is Hans Hermann in a sort of ball on the ground, and this BRM in midair destroying itself. That's just after that Martini sign going down. He loses his brakes and he goes into that runoff area. What he should have done is come down this bit of lighter tarmac and gone through the round, effectively the chicane there, and then they go back on the parallel straight again to the other end of Berlin. What a circuit! But a really nice photograph, I think, captures it a lot. Tony Brooks, fabulous in that Ferrari, and two Americans, Dan Gurney, Phil Hill, finishing second and third in 1959. So America's history. As we go to Vegas, it was. I tell you what, I'm going to have an issue fairly soon because I'm running out of power. This was the issue I had before the. Oh, I know what I can do. What can I do? I've got to find a way of getting power into the computer without disconnecting it. But anyway, yeah, Americans. And then, of course, 65 Mexican Grand Prix, Richie Ginther won, Dan Gurney second. Two Americans, first and second. So I'll just quickly go through these, and then I'm going to have to put up a little sign saying I'll be back in a second just to get some power back into this thing. This is a lovely colour shot. That's in the paddock at Monza, 1958. Mike Hawthorne's Ferrari, which went on to finish second to Tony Brooks's Vanwall. A month after Mike had lost his wonderful friend and teammate Peter Collins in the German Grand Prix, but life goes on. There's Romolo Tavoni with the leather briefcase under his arm, Ferrari team manager. Bigger engine for the Ferrari for that race, but much more significantly, that was the first time Ferrari ever ran disc brakes. Even though Jaguar won Le Mans with them in 55, this was the first time Ferrari had run, and Phil Hill was the guy that pushed Ferrari into it more than anybody else. First time they ran disc brakes on a Formula One Ferrari. Graham Hill, airborne, 69 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Wings have just been banned at Monaco that year, and it looks lovely, isn't it, that Lotus 49B. Graham had won Monaco, and then Jochen Rindt, his new teammate, won the US Grand Prix not long after that race. And that was the race in which Graham undid his seatbelts at one point to do something, I can't remember what, and then had a massive shunt when a tyre failed, and because he didn't have the seatbelts on, he broke both legs, big one. John Surtees in the Ferrari, that was just before they banned the wings. That's Friday practice at Monaco in the BRM in 69. Didn't do much. It was a Len Terry car. It was a quick car in 68, but with John doing as much as he could in that car, it wasn't a great car in 69, sadly. But I've always loved that car. I don't know why. I just think it's so many bits on it. It looks so aggressive and such a brutal car. I just love the look of it. Surtees, and there's Jimmy Clark en route to victory. Second Grand Prix win, 62 British Grand Prix at Aintree. Another interesting shot, because you often see the head-on shot through Melling Crossing at Aintree, but there's a sort of three-quarter front shot that you don't see very often either. So just an adjunct to that 1958 Monza, Taffy von Trips in a third works Ferrari had a massive shunt on the first lap, and that was the result. At the Lesmos, hit Harry Schell's car and somersaulted, and he was thrown out. And I've left the caption in there if you can read it. Henry Manny picture, Henry Manny III, great American photographer. This is from Automobile Year. And just to show, that was one of the reasons, I suppose, that for many years they didn't wear seatbelts in Formula One, even when they became obvious in the 60s, because of escapes like Von Trips. Ironic, of course, that he was later killed at Monza in 61, but look at the state of that car. And then he went into the trees in the Lesmos, and he was thrown out, and he was okay. And in that same race, or practicing for that race, look what Sterling Moss had on the Vanwall. Yeah, that's what they were looking at with the aero screens instead of the halo, wasn't it? Right, I'm going to have to put on this. I'm going to do a back soon thing now, because I've run out of battery, and in order to get everything plugged in, I haven't actually got my power in, and I know something's going to fail when I disconnect something and put the power back in. So I've got to think about what I'm going to do here. I might have to go to Wi-Fi. Just hope the Wi-Fi works. In fact, I'm going to try and do that now. Okay, I got it now. Yeah, because the power turned the sound off. Okay, I'll start all that again. Cheers. Thanks. Okay. Right. I knew something would happen. I've been talking for 5 minutes with no sound. That's because when the computer shut down and I restarted it again, obviously it shut down the audio amp and I didn't notice that. So I'm going to start again. And what happened was I selected a photo, this wonderful question. Thank you very much indeed. And it is from a gentleman called Matthew Kogel. Thank you, Matthew. And the question you can see there. Hi, Peter. You've mentioned fast drivers who weren't late breakers, but also weren't short corners. Could you make a video about Senna and how he managed to be quick without being short corner? So, yeah, I'll repeat what I was saying. You've mentioned fast drivers who weren't late breakers, but are not short corners. I don't think I've mentioned fast drivers who were, this is not me repeating myself, I'm just thinking that through on your question. I can't think of a driver who was not a short corner driver who wasn't a late breaker. I can't think of that really. But I know plenty of short corner drivers who weren't late breakers. So that's the gist of your question, I think. And let's talk about Ayrton Senna, because when he was with Alain Prost, very good example, they're both in very good car, the McLaren, and Prost was a short corner driver, absolutely no question about it. Very, very good into corners, very soft, very supple, very rarely saw him out of shape, and very quick as a result. And Ayrton, you could see in comparison with Prost out on the circuit, whenever they were there, you could see he'd always have a slightly later turn in, and his corners would be slightly longer than Prost's as a result. And that's because Ayrton was an absolute perfectionist in every aspect of his racing life, whether it was the preparation of his kit, whether it was trying to understand the format of the race weekend as a whole, let alone what was going to happen in the Formula One race, the idiosyncrasies of the starter, who was going to be pressing the button or dropping the flag, or whatever it was. All of those things were Ayrton, that's all Ayrton had thought about. And in terms of driving the car, he definitely always wanted to be the latest breaker on the circuit without in any way destabilizing the car or running the risk of running wide or locking up an inside front or whatever. It was his standard that he had to achieve the ultimate in late braking without making any mistakes whatsoever. So that was the first thing. Secondly, he was a driver of enormous commitment, particularly if the exit of the corner was blind. That's when Ayrton was absolutely at his best, committing a car to a drift angle that would be perfect on exit. And he did that time and time again. And that's why he was so good at Monaco. His speed at Monaco was not through short corners into Rascasse. His speed at Monaco was into the swimming pool and into Casino Square. And into Mirabeau as well, for example. And as an absolute example of that, and I've mentioned this before, but it's definitely worth repeating, is that whereas, say, Gilles Villeneuve, and we're talking about an era when all the drivers had to brake with their right foot, 3-pedal cars, and the fact that Ayrton was not a short corner driver is nothing to do with the fact that he wasn't able to brake with his left foot. Nothing to do with it, because Jim Clark was a short corner driver, so was Sterling Moss. So was Jackie Stewart. So it wasn't to do with the pedals. It was to do with Ayrton wanting everything to be perfect. And whereas Gilles Villeneuve, for example, in an era of 3-pedal car, would have no compunction at all about going from fifth to third to first at Long Beach and just letting the clutch out and letting the rear wheels lock to stop the car, using the gearbox half to brake, if you like. And if the gearbox blew itself apart, that's Ferrari's problem. Build a stronger one. Well, that's the way, Gilles was. And his car control was unbelievable, and his bravery was brilliant, and he was just a great guy as well. But fabulous racing driver. But Ayrton would never, ever do that in a million years. Everything had to be perfect with Ayrton. So he would always go down every gear, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He would never jump a gear. And all his synchronization, the revs, the brakes, everything had to be absolutely pin sharp perfect for Ayrton. And if he was just slightly off on revs on a downshift, it would really annoy him. And I knew that. I mean, you could see that. It happened a couple of times in Formula 3, and I used to wind him up about it sometimes. And he'd say, "Oh, it was, he was so funny like that. Not funny, ha, but funny in just intriguing, I guess." And so he was this perfect guy. And so being a short corner driver was not something that was natural to Ayrton, because it would have interfered with his ability to brake absolutely as late as possible in a straight line. And that's why he wasn't a short corner. And I don't think there's ever been a racing driver as precise as Ayrton Senna, ever. I mean, it's difficult to compare Max or Lewis or Charles. Different eras, left foot braking, different tyres, everything's different. But in terms of that level of perfection, I can't think of a driver that I would personally put up higher than Ayrton in terms of absolute perfection in the car. Gear change, absolutely silky smooth. But that's not unusual. A lot of racing drivers can do that. But no, just everything, it upset him if things weren't 100% perfect. And the late braking and the straight line braking was a part of that, for sure. He would have seen Prost's short corner stuff. He would have seen that as intriguing, but too much of a compromise with what he wanted to do with the car under brakes. That's what that would have been. And that's why he got so annoyed when Mika Häkkinen got in the car and went quite slightly quicker, because Mika was all about, left foot braking and doing some good stuff. And Ayrton was... Hello, Dexter. Hello. He always comes in when he knows there's something going on in here over a long period of time. He likes to sit down, but he's being removed now from the studio as it happens. Right, bit of a messy live feed this, isn't it? But thank you very much for that question. I hope that kind of answers it, sort of. Very good. Right, what are we doing here? Just trying to find out where we were now. Okay, this is again on... There's actually the next question, funnily enough, which leads on from all the Ayrton Senna comments. So let's have a look what he says. It's from Lou Sequoia. Hello, Peter. I remember you telling a story about Ayrton Senna holding his breath for a long time. Can you say a little more, please? Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I was researching an article I was writing for the Sunday Times colour supplement about Ayrton's passing. I think it was probably, 5-year anniversary, maybe 10 years. I can't remember now. Maybe, it couldn't have been 10. It was probably 5 years. And I was talking to as many people who knew Ayrton as possible, and who also who were at Imola, I guess. And Crichton Brown was a very good friend of mine, one of the early supporters of Ron Dennis in the projects 1, 2 and 3 days, and was therefore at quite a lot of the Grand Prix with Ron as part of McLaren, wearing a Marlboro McLaren shirt in that era, in the late 80s. And I'm not quite sure what he did at McLaren, actually. I think it's something on sponsorship, but he was such a nice guy. He spoke like this, very sweet man. He had a pig farm in Brazil, lovely wife called Terry. Great guy, really good guy. Everybody loved him. Very fast racing driver in his own right. A clubman's driver, won a lot of races against Jeff Friswell, and just really good bloke. And Ayrton took a liking to him, and they became very good friends, also because Terry was Brazilian, Crichton's wife. And in the course of all this, I was talking to Crichton, and I said, I'm doing this article for the Sunday Times about Ayrton's accident. He said, one thing you might be interested to know is that Ayrton told me once that when he's on a pole lap and he really is concentrating at maximum, he tries to hold his breath as long as possible around the lap, just to heighten his senses. I don't know if this is of interest, Peter. And that was it, really. And I followed it up from there, and actually contacted a Hammersmith and Fulham Hospital, or Cromwell Hospital actually, to see if there were any medical authorities there that I could speak to about this. And actually I had lunch. I took out to lunch one of the senior medics who was an expert on that sort of stuff, and he said, oh yeah, he said there's absolutely no doubt that if you do hold your breath for as long as you can in that period, you will heighten your senses and your feel for what you're doing in a sport. He said, of course this guy knew nothing about Formula One. He said, but if this guy is a racing driver and you're relying on inputs from the car and reacting to it, for sure it would be advantageous. So that's it. You know, I'm not saying that he would have been holding his breath going into Tamburello, but he might have been, because it was the restart, it was the first full flying lap. He knew Michael, in his own mind, Michael's Benetton was illegal. He was determined not to let Michael get a tow and pass him into Tosa, because then it would have been all over. He would hard-earned pole. He was unbelievably annoyed about how slow the safety car had been going. No fault of Max Angelelli, of course, the driver, but because it was a basic road car. And all those things piled up. And I suspect, you know, even though he'd said to Damon in practice, straight qualifying, be very careful of the bumps at Tamburello, bearing in mind these cars had no suspension. They just had this big flat floor. And if you hit a bump, it could basically just take off. And Damon was quite circumspect through there as a result in the other Williams. Ayrton, you know, we can only imagine it, but you know, possibly he decided to go through that corner flat, and may have been holding his breath at the time. I'm not sure that would have had any impact on what happened, but significant point that came out of the research, I guess, more than anything else. And also a Paul-Henri Caillet photograph, head-on shot of Ayrton coming out of the chicane, leading the pack, starting that lap, and you can see on the track a little bit of blue Benetton carbon shard bodywork, tiny piece, but enough to have caught Ayrton's eye possibly at track level and made him maybe move slightly offline, or the line he wanted, in order to minimize the effect of the bumps, onto a line where maybe the bump effect would have been worse, bearing in mind he had 0 tire pressure and temperature at the time. And if you put all those facts together, it's pretty worrying. So yeah, I have no doubt that he did do that. Hold his breath. Again, just shows his level of commitment, doesn't it? So this is another question from Douglas Sardo. Thank you very much. It's been a bit of a drama, isn't it? This one. It always is when I did a factory reboot. Is that what they call it, on my computer, just to get rid of all the gremlins plugins that have been affecting OBS. And I think I've done it, hopefully. But in doing that, you get rid of a lot of other stuff as well that you can't remember that you need. Douglas Sardo, hi Peter, greetings from Brazil. Hi there. Could you please talk about that Lotus 43 with the BRM H16 engines and how Jim Clark managed to grab a win with it? Thank you so much for your wonderful content. What a great question out of the blue. Unbelievable, isn't it? You think, you say to people, I do a live stream about Formula One. Oh yeah, what do you talk about? Oh, well, this and that. I could say, well, I'll talk about the way Jim Clark won the 1966 US Grand Prix in the Lotus 43 BRM. Nobody would believe me. But anyway, thank you very much, Douglas, for the question. What an amazing thing. I have got a video actually on my channel. You might want to watch it after this, of the startup of the Lotus 43 BRM, that actual car with which Jimmy won the US Grand Prix in 66. And it's an amazing engine, H16, 3-litre H16, amazing engine. It's the only race that engine ever won. It was big, heavy, drank a lot of fuel. But Jimmy drove that car with the BRM engine quite a lot. He drove it at Monza, he drove it there, Mexico, South Africa the following year, 67. How did he do it? Well, Not quite sure, really. I don't think he knew. I don't think Jackie Stewart, who drove the factory BRMs, and they didn't win a race all year, I don't think he can imagine how he did it either. I mean, it just stayed together. I mean, Jimmy had this thing at the Glen where he often had dramas and often overcame them. Following year, he won the US Grand Prix with half the rear suspension hanging off the back of the Lotus 49. It was a race of attrition. I mean, he wasn't the fastest car there. I suppose that's what you got to say in an era where quite often you'd be leading and something would go wrong, and the Brabhams weren't that reliable by then. They'd clinched the championship, and Brabham Repcos, and Jimmy was very, very good mechanically, nursing the car and not over punishing the engine and always coming out of the revs a little bit if necessary, just to keep the thing alive. And I think a lot of it is that, great tribute to Jim Clark's mechanical sympathy that he was able to win that race as well. Good car, that Lotus 43. It's a shame the BRM engine was so unreliable and heavy and thirsty, because it was actually a very good car. And not that far away from the Lotus 49 in terms of concept, because the engine was pretty much a stress member of the car. But because it was much heavier, it did need a bit of support. And if you look at the nose section, it's very similar to the Lotus 49 as well. So it's a good car, and Jimmy won with it in that US Grand Prix. Amazing. And then the car was bought by a mad Scot called Jock Russell, who put a Buick engine in the back, and where the yellow stripe was, he put a tartan stripe down there. I remember that. And I remember I heard once that actually Graham Gall told me that this was years later in the 90s, that Jock Russell still had that car, the monocoque, in the top half of his barn on his farm somewhere in Scotland, and because he'd had a big shunt with it at Ingliston or something, and bent the monocoque and just put the monocoque up on the shelf, and that was it. And I thought, well, let's go up there and see if he wants to sell it. Make a thing, buy a damaged, even if it's damaged, this will be the actual chassis that Jimmy used. So I went up there, and he was completely mad. He came out with a shotgun, double barrel shotgun, get off my land. And Graham had sort of teed it up, said, oh, well, he has these bad days, his off days. So I didn't pursue it. But to his credit, Andy Middlehurst did buy it. I'm not sure if he bought it from Jock Russell, but he bought it, and he built this beautiful, built it up again from scratch. And that's the car you'll see in the video on this channel, if you want to hear what it sounds like. H16 sounded great. Right, Kurt Borman, I think, is disagreeing with me. Well, no, I'm not saying Checo is the perfect number 2 for Sergio Perez. For Max Verstappen. I think there are probably about 8 drivers out there could be the perfect number 2, but I think he's one of them. Anyway, let's see what Kurt's got to say about that. Kurt Borman. Hi, if the other teams catch up to Red Bull next year, I don't think Checo would be the perfect number 2, as you like to call him, because he's just too far behind Max. Who would have put you in that? Who would you put in that second seat? Well, you wouldn't have been saying that when he was out there winning this year, would you? And a lot of people were saying, oh, wow, isn't Checo brilliant? Especially all the Mexican fans. So, it depends. I think there's a lot to be said when in doubt in Formula One, to say to yourself, what would Michael do in this situation? And I still think that applies today. I think Michael Schumacher's approach to Formula One, outside, I don't mean necessarily the way he drove the car. I don't mean that at all. I mean the way he ran Ferrari with Jean Todt, and the way he looked at all the ways of winning races and the packages you could put together. The whole Ferrari thing, the good people he brought from Benetton, the Bridgestone deal he managed to put together with Jean Todt and Ross Brawn. All of those things. I mean, Michael was absolutely on it. And Michael's philosophy was, have me in the team will work around me. Effectively, he wouldn't say that, I'm the fastest driver in the world. The Constructors' Championship will take care of itself. Let me win the Drivers' Championship. That is what it's all about. And I still think he's right. I've said before, there are very few examples of teams that win the Drivers' Championship and don't win the Constructors' Championship. Yes, I know it's possible, but it's really only a secondary thing that the team needs to think about. And I think if they go too far down the other road, the converse road of, no, we got to have the 2 fastest drivers we possibly can to maximize our points in every race to win the Constructors' Championship, guess what? You're probably going to lose the Drivers' Championship as a result. And that has an ongoing effect on the way the drivers perform anyway. So, and I'm sure Michael could see that. But the thing is, today, not many people do see life that way, and they're obsessed with having the 2 best guys they can. I don't think it's the way to go. And maybe Perez now, you could say, after getting beaten by Fernando Alonso in an Aston Martin around Brazil, maybe the time has come to think about getting somebody who's a bit more adaptable and a bit more of a racer in all conditions than Sergio Perez. Probably not in terms of pace, because you don't want a George Russell in there, you don't want an Oscar Piastri in there stirring things up, and so who else would I put in that second seat? If Red Bull, I'm not going away, I'm just going to turn the fan a little bit away because it's getting a little bit cold. In fact, I'm going to turn the fan off. It was on earlier because so stressful in here, so much stuff going on. There we are. I think Carlos Sainz would be a good number 2 to Max at Red Bull. I'd like to say Mick Schumacher. I don't know if he's been out of it so long that it'd be difficult for him to even be as quick as Perez has been on occasions. Places like Baku, Monaco, obviously. I don't know. I think it'd probably be too big an ask for him. Liam Lawson, maybe. But I'm not sure Red Bull want to go that route, do they? They don't want to have a young guy that they've got to train up still. I know he's done a few races, but I mean, their whole image is that we have these seasoned Grand Prix drivers, and Perez has been around a long time. Nico Hülkenberg could probably do a very good job in the other car, I think. Daniel Ricciardo would do a great job. Should never have left the team in the first place. The perfect complement to Max. I won't say number 2. Complement to Max. He would have been perfect. But he couldn't handle it. You see, that's the problem. You've got to have a driver that is quick enough to do the job, but is also quick enough to be able to handle how good Max is in the other car. And that's not an easy thing for any racing driver. I mean, Rubens, in the end, it got to Rubens at Ferrari, and it got to Felipe Massa, didn't it? Both of them could have stayed, but neither of them could hack it anymore. They just had to go somewhere where their local fans kept telling them, you should be a number 1, you shouldn't be doing this. And so they had to, leave, and it didn't really help them, their career-wise. Rubens, yeah, okay, he won some races at Brawn, but it was not quite the same as being at Ferrari, was it? So it'd be interesting, It was interesting that Christian sort of was out there saying to Checo, well, you can't win them all, great last lap, and blah, blah, blah. To me, if you got Checo Perez, I would never have expected him to beat Alonso around Brazil, to be honest. Once you saw that the Aston Martin was a good car and the tyres weren't going to go off, and the Red Bull was not 100%, as per, as we could see from Max's performance, there was no way in the world he was going to beat Alonso. That was the way I saw that from day one, and I was a bit surprised that he did get him 3 laps from the end, and not surprised at all that Alonso repassed him. It was all fairly predictable, I think, and because that's the way Perez is. He's not as good as Alonso, that's for sure. But then again, that's what you expect. That's what Red Bull bought, and he brings quite a lot of money with him too. I'm not saying that's massively important to Red Bull, but you see how many companies they have on the car now. It looks to me as if Red Bull have said, we need to offset as much as we can now, how much we're spending on Formula One, and this is a time when the A team can earn a lot of money from sponsors. Go to it. So that's another thing to remember, of course. Who have I left anybody out that could be good in that? Oh, Valtteri Bottas would be another guy I think would do a good job in that second Red Bull. He's the sort of guy that Red Bull would hire, actually, because he's got a good pedigree. He's a bit quieter than Perez. He's he's not by no means in the same class as Max or Lewis or Charles, but he's not bad, better than Perez, I think. So I think, if you're going to look at anybody, Bottas would be the guy, actually. It'd be worth making an offer to Bottas, because I can't imagine he imagines he's going to be in Audi's future there. I'm sure he's not. So just a nice 2-year deal for Bottas there would be a very good move for them, I think. Elliot Davidson, hi Peter, A1 content. Well, thank you very much. Not sure that applies today after all the dramas we've had. You just see, see how difficult it is sometimes. I see how difficult it is sometimes. So when things go well, I suppose I should be a bit more grateful. One of the most interesting aspects of driving is the braking, but we rarely get any TV insight other than how late drivers brake. How would you present this to a TV audience? Well, I don't really... Well, I think it all starts with the Concord Agreement, to be honest. I think, if Formula One likes to sell itself as the pinnacle of technology, which it does, what aspects of the Concord Agreement come under the heading of, and we need to show this technology to the public in a way that is really watchable and really adds to the TV show? I don't even think I think there's things like, covers on the cars and stuff like that. But in terms of what the teams have to allow us to see in order to see the technology at work, I don't think there's much in there. So I would start with the Concord Agreement, which says that the teams must give us much more access to braking traces and things like that. And I think it wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be very difficult to do footwell cameras if the teams again were required to build a footwell of a certain size in order to incorporate the FOM camera. The problem is not the camera, actually, it's the lighting, and you need space for that. So, but you can easily design, if they design a cockpit to fit Esteban Ocon and also Yuki Tsunoda, then they can absolutely come up with a template for a footwell area that will fit an FOM footwell cam. And the problem was they've had a couple going, but they're not really coordinated to the steering, and you couldn't really see very much anyway. It wasn't very well, it wasn't a beautiful thing to watch like it is the steering wheel. So I'd get on top of all of that. And then you need to have a trace as the brakes are being used, and it needs to show the pressure that's being used. And you need to be able to you need to have the trace showing how they come out of the brake pedal, because how they come out of the brake pedal relative to what they're doing with the steering at that moment is just as important as when they initially touch the brake pedal. And as you correctly say, there's quite the only thing they ever talk about is where one driver brakes compared with another, which to me is only telling maybe a 10% of the story, because it doesn't actually tell you at what point they're braking to. It just tells you at what point they're starting to brake. So it's a bit irrelevant unless you know what the point they're braking to. I presume they never show us that because they don't go into that calculation, but I'm assuming they're doing up to the minute the millisecond the corner starts to become a corner at the end of being a straight, which is not correct anyway. So it's all meaningless. So you need to see all of that, and you need to have a good footwell camera. That's how I would do it. And I think then, if it was properly explained and it was really well done, and we really got into comparing the drivers and the way they were doing it, I think it could work very well. But it would take the Concord Agreement change in order for that to happen. That's the problem. And because of that, the Concord Agreement is based on all sorts of political deals anyway. Oh, we'll give you this, we'll take that away. If you give us that, we'll take this. And so it will never happen, because that sort of thing will always get put at the bottom of the list anyway. So don't get too excited anytime soon. It's not going to happen, I don't think. But all we can do is watch and observe and talk and listen also to the engine notes. Elliot Davison says, thank you, we need short corner T-shirts. Yeah, well, who's going to make those? You're waiting for me to make them. Okay, Ahmed Al-Faith. Let's have a look at this. This looks like a good question. I'll tell you what, because this has been such a messy technical display from Windsor tonight, I might just try and go on a little bit longer as a bonus to make up for all these issues. Hopefully everything's clear now. That was my manager phoning, by the way, saying, nobody can hear what you're saying, Peter. Great phone call to get. Ahmed Al-Faith. After Austin, Max said that this was his first time in Formula One where he faced brake problems, which I found quite interesting. His 9 years in Formula One. Does that have to do with how he applies the brakes? I was trying to remember what happened there. I think it was the brake balance wasn't responding in the way it should, and he wasn't confident at any given moment at how the brake balance was going to feel on any given corner. That's the impression I got talking to him. I have to say, I need to talk to some people I know at Red Bull and haven't yet about that, exactly what it was. But from what I gather, it was that. And that's why I say I think Max was, visually, he was definitely leaving himself room under braking in a straight line to get everything done. So what he didn't want to do is find himself starting to go in early, trading steering against brakes, and find that he was losing the rear or the front or something. It's nothing worse. So he was definitely giving himself more straight line braking scope, and it was really good to see. I mean, this is the difference between Max and Perez. You know, when things go wrong, Max immediately has a way of thinking it through. Maybe it takes him a lap or two, but he can think it through and find a way of getting through the problem or making the problem not become as big an issue as it perhaps would in the hands of another driver. You know, it's Jim Clark winning the 1965 International 100 at Warwick Farm, having lost third gear on lap 2, and apologising to his team afterwards that it took him 4 laps to find a way of driving the car around the lap using third instead of, he lost second gear, using third instead of second. And but then by the end, his lap times were spot on. So, you know, that is what great drivers do. And it happens time and again. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that brake problems, they're more of the balance thing these days, although we had retirements, didn't we, from brake issues. Was it the Aston Martins couldn't get the brakes to work in Austin, could they? It just shows, you know, there they are in Austin, no brakes. There they are in Mexico, nothing, to the point where Fernando just pulls out of the race because the car's undrivable. And then in Brazil, they're better than a Red Bull, really, just beaten only by McLaren. That's ground effect. Back end of 23 season. Ahmed says, love the content, by the way. Greetings from Cairo. Thank you very much indeed. Kristen Lavender, sorry. This bloody thing keeps coming up. Excuse my French. Right, here we go. Let's get another question up. Kristen Lavender. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm a bit discombobulated tonight with all these technical glitches. Hi Peter, hope you're doing well. Can you please rank the top 5 best rookies you've seen of the current drivers? Best 5 rookie seasons you've seen of the current drivers. Well, Lewis, obviously. Kevin Magnussen. Oscar Piastri. Max Verstappen. That's 4. 5. I was pretty impressed with Lando, actually, in his first year. Yeah, I'd give it to Lando. I was going to say Charles, but I mean, Charles just did a very good job in the Sauber, didn't he? He just sort of, it was a great rookie season, but the car was not great, and so it was difficult to get too excited about it. Yeah, I think Lando did pretty well. Yeah, That's pretty good 5 for you, I think. Hope that made sense. Kevin Magnussen, he was on the podium, wasn't he? His first race or something. Pretty good. Not bad. Gone downhill since? No, shouldn't be saying that. Konrad Kubanski. Let's have a look at this one. Konrad Kubanski. Hi, evening, Peter. Great to see another live stream. Thank you very much. I'm sure you're being very kind. I mean, I'm feeling a little bit ragged. Max and his race engineer, Jim Piero, have a very strong bond and understanding. How important do you think such a relationship is for optimizing the car? I think it's very important, because the more you can just say in a few words, and the race engineer knows immediately what you're talking about and can get on with it, the more time you can save and the more you can spend on something else. That's why it's quite interesting when Rob Wilson does days with some Grand Prix or Formula 2 or Formula 3 drivers. Quite often he says to the driver, don't be afraid to bring along your race engineer because this could be really good. He could get some shorthand of some of the things we're talking about. If you feel they're beneficial, he can then refer to them at the next race and just say, eyes or wing or whatever it is that just makes you remember what we're doing. And quite often, quite a lot of race engineers do come along and they all think it's brilliant and they respond to that. So I think, that understanding is very good. And I think that's one of the reasons Ferrari are struggling this year with Charles Leclerc, particularly because, I think Jock Clear does a brilliant job. And, he was very sad. I need to pass on best wishes to Jock because he recently had some personal bereavements, which kept him away from races. But he was in Mexico and Charles had a good weekend there and he wasn't in Brazil. And I got to say, that engineer they do have talking to Charles, if I was Charles, I'd get a bit annoyed by that. It's like they've said to him, they've discussed over the winter that they've got to have more compliance with their strategy and got to be able to make sure they all understand they're all on the same page and not just say run the hard tyre, Charles, and he has no input or whatever it is in the middle of the Hungarian Grand Prix. And it's pretty clear that sort of discussion has taken place, particularly since Freddie's arrived, Freddie Vasseur, and yet but it's gone the other way now, and you've got this guy. And I'm not in any way getting personal here, but I mean, he says to Charles things like, you can tell he's thinking in his head, I want to make sure Charles is happy with what we're going to do, which again is going too far the other way. You don't want to be asking a driver to help you make a decision in the middle of a race. All he wants is to know the decision's been made for this reason and get on with it, basically. And so the question, Charles, we are thinking of staying with plan A, but the problem with plan A might be that we have degradation. And the question then is maybe we go to plan B, but if we go to plan B, we will lose track position of approximately 6.3 seconds. So this is the situation at the moment. Question. If I was Charles, I think he quite often does say, look, just get on with it. And it's odd, isn't it, that they have these sort of long conversations now. That's one of the things that's so odd about modern radio. And the other is when they say, there's something jammed under the brake pedal and I can't feel, and it feels like I've got a puncture on the right rear and the handling's terrible, brake vibration. And they say, copy that. Car's in a million pieces. I've just had a massive shunt. Copy that. Let's copy that business. I suppose that's what happens in World War II, is it? We just lost 3 of our destroyers. Copy that. Very strange. I don't want to be personal. I'm sure the engineer on Charles' car is a really good bloke, and he's trying to do his best job. It just seems like they're pussyfooting around rather than just getting on with it. But then again, Jim Perro is pretty good with Max, isn't he? He says, Max says, but why are we doing this? And he said, look, Max, just bear with us. It'll pay off. Don't worry. He's pretty good. You've got to be tough to be a race engineer, to speak to Max Verstappen like that. He knows what he's talking about. That's absolutely for sure. Good stuff. Yeah, amazing. Right. Good question, thanks. Jacob M. Van Tuyul. Not very good at pronunciation tonight either, am I? I was trying to help my son this morning prior to a French exam, trying to remember all the days of the week. Jeudi, mardi, lundi. Can you blame Oscar's now somewhat poor form on the length of the season? He's still a rookie, of course, and Lando is going very well at the moment. Cheers. No, I don't think it's on the length of the season. I think he's started using the tyres a bit too much, too quickly, and he's gone into about 3 races of bad tyre deg, which suggests inputs are a bit spiky for the way he wants to drive the car, and or things going wrong, and he's had damage as well, I think, in quite a lot of them, as a result of not qualifying very well and getting involved in first lap skirmishes. And he hasn't. I think it all started for me actually in Q3 in Mexico, didn't it? He was pretty good Q1, I think, from memory. Q2, and he just fell away, and yeah, I mean, I think it's more to do with he's had a bout of tyre deg that he didn't have earlier in the year, and I don't think it's because he's doing anything differently. I think it's because he's either got some damage on the car and it's a circumstance, or he's the way he drives. He needs to improve his level of suppleness and general flexion in terms of hands, wrists, and everything else. And I think it's more that, if I really had to put my finger on it. I'm only guessing from the outside, and I'm not sure this is something that the McLaren engineers themselves would be looking at, because I don't think they differentiate, as we said before, between long and short corner drivers at an engineering level, because it's not something you see on telemetry anyway. But I think that's where Oscar, you're seeing a guy in his first year up against the problem of the Pirelli tyre monopoly and getting the tyres to work very consistently through a stint, or indeed get them to the right temperature in qualifying. And during the summer, he's been very, very good at that. And then we've had some slightly different races in terms of temperatures, and it's been more of an issue. And he'll get on top of that. I'm pretty sure he'll get on top of that. He thinks a lot without talking very much, which is great. And it's an interesting point, though. I think ever since he's been slightly off the boil, or poor form, as you put it, it's interesting to see how Lando's gone the other way, and Lando's become much more confident. And that just bears out what I'm saying, that this presence of this Oscar Piastri there, who's very, very good, has an effect on Lando Norris. And that's something that, Red Bull are very aware of in terms of protecting what they have with Max Verstappen. And it works both ways. If Oscar isn't doing very well, it'll elevate Lando. And if he is doing well, it actually cramps Lando's style. So that's what's going on at the moment. Lando's driving beautifully and getting more and more confident with the car. But that's not to say that will continue if Oscar suddenly finds his sweet spot again and gets the best from the tyres and has a very good qualifying session and out-qualifies Lando, for example. Back to square one, I would predict. And I think that will happen. I think Oscar will definitely bounce back pretty quickly from a couple of bad races. Jacob also agrees with Elliot Davidson about we need short corner t-shirts. Yeah, good stuff. I'm amazed. I probably haven't got down to the questions where people are saying you've gone blank and what the hell are you doing and get a life, Peter. But nobody, so far, it's probably quite good that I haven't got down to the bottom. I haven't seen any of these comments yet. I hope everybody's very nice about it. Hi, Peter. Right, here's a question. Hi, Peter. Great stuff as always. Back to the question. Can you elaborate on the wide turns Alonso took on turn 10 and 12, maybe others, missing the apex completely all the time with Perez behind him? Yeah, that was just... I mean, it's not an unusual thing insofar as Alonso is concerned. He's very, very good like that, and very good at just working out what to do at that specific moment in order to maximize the situation. And he's got Perez behind him, who's locked into doing this racing line all the time that, you know, Fernando can see and feel. And so what's the logical thing for Fernando is just to make sure that he protects the exit. That's what he's thinking about. He's protecting the exit all the time. So he's sort of getting himself into a position of being at the exit, mid-corner, if you like. And he can do that very easily because he's very good at doing a Sebastian Vettel V-type corner. So he's just braking in a straight line, straight down to a point, and then just got very low minimum speed, which is good as well because it sort of makes Perez stay on the throttle a little bit, stay off the throttle for a little bit longer if he's that close. And then he's just protected the exit straight away. And and there's a lot of grip there. And Fernando wouldn't have done it if there wasn't a lot of grip. He would have felt that very quickly. And just classic Fernando Alonso driving in that situation. Beautiful to watch. Really, really good. And, nice for him that finally he was in that position rather than, chasing Vitaly Petrov around Abu Dhabi, for example. So, yeah. And it reminded me also of that massive battle he had with Michael at Imola. When Michael's in the Ferrari and he was in the Renault. And he just sort of beautifully just put the pressure on Michael more and more and more. And he was using all bits of road as well there. So, I think in that sense, when you hear Mark Webber and people say, there's nobody better than Fernando Alonso on race day on a Sunday, maybe not the greatest qualifier in the world, but, come race day, he's the guy. That's what they're talking about. It's the way Fernando can drive the car on any bit of road, really. But it also comes back to the Rob Wilson thing of if you do have very, very good rates of input, which Fernando has. I mean, I've always said he's got that very stark initial turn in, but after that, his footwork and handwork is just dazzlingly good in terms of keeping the car beautifully stable in whatever situation he finds himself. And that's how he drives. That's the way he drives and always has done. And that shows how good his foot and handwork is. And Rob's always said, forget about racing line. It's all about managing the dynamic weight. And he can drive 3 laps of Goodwood or Donington or Silverstone or Brands Hatch on 3 completely different lines, but using perfect inputs on all 3 laps, and the lap times will be the same within a tenth or two. It's much more important to manage the dynamic weight than it is to have the correct racing line. And that's what Ayrton Senna was also about as well. And so that's what we saw with Fernando. He was doing everything within the realms of managing the dynamic weight perfectly, and then thinking, because he's got all that under control, then thinking, what is Perez good at? Oh, he's good at exits for sure. So what am I going to be doing here? Protecting the exit. There's no way this guy's going to pass me down the inside, because that's not what he does. He doesn't have enough feel for the front of the car to be aggressive like that. And he's going to be thinking DRS, that's the easy pass for him. He's never going to try and dive down the inside somewhere. And he proved to be correct. He's absolutely correct. Not massively difficult to read, to be honest, from Fernando's point of view. And what he did, I think, quite a lot of drivers out there would have been driving that way. Lewis for sure, Max probably in that situation. And beautiful to watch. Really good. So, another question here. I always go a bit silent here, as you know, because I'm focusing on trying not to make any more mistakes. Yeah, right. Had an interesting phone call, interchange the other day with the father of a very, very good Spanish golfer, young golfer, who's playing on the DP World Tour, European Tour. He's good. He's very good. Who wants to get in touch with good Formula One sports psychologist to help his son. So that's an interesting thing to see how a Formula One orientated sports psychologist would apply that to a young, very good golfer. I don't know why I mentioned that. Just one of the things I've been doing today. Lee Kambaga, I have a question. If McLaren continue with this good job and outdevelop Merc next year, will Mercedes provide reliable engines or might they screw them? Well, in the old days, you probably would have, wouldn't you? But I don't think they would now. I think the problem is now, I think it's quite difficult for Toto to do that, isn't it? Because the engines are all homologated and that is the engine you get. So I don't think there's any chance. As much as he'd probably like to do that, I don't think he could by the rules, sadly. I mean, in the old days, of course, with the Cosworth DFVs and all the customers, and originally it was with Lotus exclusively, and then all the customers got it. It all evened out because all the engines were rebuilt by different builders all over the UK. Alan Peck, John Nicholson, Cosworth themselves, and so forth. But I don't think he can do anything now, really. So I don't think Mercedes could do that. As I say, I'm sure they'd like to. Yeah, right. Let's have a look at what this one is. The interesting thing is I was looking at a couple of other of these, whatever you call them, suites, edit suite things like OBS. And none of them actually had a system better than this, even ones that cost a fortune. They all had the same thing where you have to take the text across. Of course, I can have the live chat, but it's not the same as putting something on screen. And to have it on screen, there is no other way of doing it than this, I've discovered, I think. Probably cut off if your name there, sorry. Let me just have a look. I should, because it's an S there beginning. Sarosh Soman. There we go. Sarosh, thank you very much for the question. Hi, Peter. It appears to me that Prost and Mansell were early turn-in, short corner and smoother drivers than Senna. Considering today's scenario, do you think that they would have managed tyres better? Wow. So how would Ayrton Senna have managed the Pirellis? Well, he was pretty good on the Pirellis, wasn't he, when he was in the Tolman? Didn't have a problem with them. And they weren't very good tyres then, but he got the best from them. Nearly won Monaco, didn't he? But there was a different era for Pirelli then. It wasn't a monopoly, and they weren't building tyres that only lasted, 20 laps. So it's a good question. I think Ayrton was so good at keeping the car square to the road, flat to the road, and just keeping everything perfect in the way I described with his gear changing. I think he would have been incredibly good at managing tyre deg. Almost certainly he would have been brilliant at it. I don't think short corner, long corner makes any difference with tyre deg. It's all to do with inputs, rate of inputs. When I say rate of inputs, I mean inputs, steering input and brake and throttle input that are exactly the correct measure based on what the dynamic weights are doing at any millisecond. That's what I mean when I say rates of input. And of course, that's why I always put Fernando Alonso outside the sort of top 3 or 4, because his initial rate of input on the steering is always far in excess of what the car needs. Even when he's, protecting P3 in Brazil. That's the only way he can drive. He needs to feel the car. He needs to generate all these dynamic weights very quickly in order just to get on top of them. And then he gets on top of them beautifully. But that's why he's not brilliant in qualifying. I'm convinced of it, because that doesn't work on one lap when everything has to be absolutely perfect. In the race, everything's a little bit more sludgy because there are so many other variables going on. Makes sense. That's why, I love Alonso, because he's different. Very different from everybody else. Doesn't copy them. It's all Fernando Alonso does it this way, and that is the only way. Right. And Fernando also makes it look quite easy, doesn't he? I mean, the way he balances the car and a car that Fernando Alonso is driving mid-corner, usually, unless he's having a big drama, looks absolutely perfectly in line and square to the road. Incredible. Alex B. Hi, Peter. I was kind of surprised on how tame Perez went on Alonso. Can't imagine Max or Lewis being that patient. Was this a situation where the driver has not enough courage to make a move? Not enough skill, I think. Nothing to do with courage. As I said earlier, and I know you would have asked this question before I started my thing, but I mean, that is to do with the fact that one of Perez's weakest points is the entry to the corner. He only has one way of driving, and that's sort of get into the apex as best he can, having brake more or less in a straight line, as brake late as he can. Perez comes into his own mid-corner onwards. When he's really good, nothing special in terms of positioning the car. He's just very good on power application, but he's not brilliant into a corner, never has been. And that's why Fernando was driving the way he was, because he knew there was no way Perez was going to do anything down the inside. It's just his skill level. It's not to do with bravery. I mean, he just doesn't have the capacity to think about how he would get away with it. If he did do that, what would he do? If the front end started to slide, he got understeer, what would he do? He wouldn't know. Whereas Max would know, no, I can do that. Just, come out of the brakes a little bit softer, do this, do that. One lap, he'd be past him. 2 laps, maybe. And it was only because of the DRS that he got him anyway. And then he was so happy and relaxed and he got him that he he blew it and got repassed. What's he thinking or not thinking? Right. What's this one? I won't be watching, this is Fernando Matias, I won't be watching live today, but I have 2 hours of Formula One goodness to listen to tomorrow while editing. Thank you. Well, I think we'll need to edit that bit out in the middle when I was talking with no sound as well. So thank you very much. All right. What are we doing now? Back here to YouTube. Very good one, Fernando. Very good. The reason I don't copy all of these is because whenever I try and put the cursor on it to copy it over, this thing comes up saying, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? It's so annoying. Messages all the time. WC Robinson. Hi, Peter. Hope you're well. Alonso again showed us the joy of watching defensive driving in battles. What are some of your famous defensive duels from over the years in Formula One? Thanks. Well, if you're thinking of duels where the winner was the defender, I think Jack Brabham was always unbelievably difficult to pass, but only because in those days you could use the track edges to throw up stones and bricks and stuff, and so that's what he did. So nobody wanted to, and so Jack was a great defender. Nobody wanted to attack him because in doing so, as Sterling Moss found in the 1960 Dutch Grand Prix, that you will get a bit of curb in your face if you try and get too close to old Black Jack. I think, Ayrton Senna didn't like being pounced upon, did he? Was he a good defender? I'm not sure he was. I think he was pretty, annoyed if anybody got near him. So I'm thinking of drivers who are very, like Alonso, very clean, very, very imaginative, and very, very skillful in the way they can drive the car in various modes. And so there's Alonso. Let me think. So how was Prost in that situation? I think Prost was relatively easy to pass, actually. So I wouldn't put him down as a great defender. I'll tell you who was a great defender was René Arnoux. The number of races in which that guy just held up 6 or 7 cars. Admittedly, he had a turbo, and most of the cars he held up were all in Cosworth engines, but he was really good. in defence. Arnoux, very good in defence. Michael, what was Michael like? Michael was all right, I think. See, Lewis under pressure, yeah, pretty good. I mean, Jim Clark, 64 British Grand Prix, Graham Hill, massive pressure on Jimmy throughout that race, and Jimmy was very, very good under pressure there. Very good. Somebody said, oh yeah, but he wasn't very good in attack statistically. Well, it's because he wasn't very often in a position of having to attack. He was usually in front. Sorry, that's my answer anyway. Now, if I had to choose a good driver in defence along the lines of Alonso, I'd say Rene Arnoux. But I don't think he was as skillful as Alonso mid-corner onwards. He was just very good at just holding people up, really. It's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, it just struck me when, I think it was Max's first year in Formula One, and Perez was in the Force India, and it was Mexico. And Max had made a stop or something and caught Perez and just couldn't get past him. And they spent like 30 laps, I think it was. Long time, maybe 25 laps, stuck behind him. I thought, and that was the first time I really registered how good Perez was in defence, but hopeless in attack, really. In other situations, when you see him, it's usually, ends in tears or doesn't happen. And but I would say actually Perez is one of the best guys in defence out there, ironically. And had he been, I mean, he wasn't very good, obviously, on the last lap, but I think that's just because he fell asleep, having thought he'd got P3 secured in Brazil and just took his eye off the ball, and partly because of DRS as well. But, he should never have got repassed, really, should he? So, generally, Perez is very good in defence. I think Jenson Button was quite good in defence as well, actually, if I think about it. He was quite a difficult guy to pass. Yeah, it's a good question. Need to think more about that. Have a think about it over the next week or so. Why does that message keep coming up? Right, got there in the end. Right, another one. My wife took Dexter out of the studio so he wouldn't be annoying. Not that he would have been annoying to me at all. I bet he's just sitting the other side of the door. That's the way he is. Barrett ends. Hi, Peter. Oscar sometimes seems to struggle with... Oh, we've had that one. What's going on? Sorry, anyway, that's the Oscar Piastri tyre one. Yeah, obviously you asked the question twice. Anyway, try not to do that, because obviously every question takes a bit of time to get up there, and want to move on at a brisk pace. Yep. Hello, Peter. This is from Rao. Hi, Peter. Which race promoter was the best to deal with during your time in Formula One? That's a good question. Race promoters. We don't these days get into much in contact with the race promoter as an individual anymore. It's all sort of big corporate events everywhere. So yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? John Webb was the race promoter at Brands Hatch, or Motor Circuit Developments, and it was Brands and all the others, Mallory Park, Snedders and everything. But he was British Grand Prix, and he was a very difficult guy. But I like John Webb a lot because he's a good racer, and he had a good racing brain, and so he always had an answer, and he's always ready to talk to you. So that was John Webb. I think the US Grand Prix were the Argot Singers did a superb job at Watkins Glen, and there was never a moment when you couldn't talk to the father or the son and have fun with them. The US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen was one of the best Grand Prix of the year, I always thought, and the Argot Singers should take a lot of credit for that. Let me think, what else? Yeah, I think, South Africa, Alex Blignort was Kyalami, and the race was on a Saturday. Interestingly, Vegas is just on a Saturday night, which means the first time in Formula One a race is on a Saturday since the '74 South African Grand Prix at Kyalami, which Carlos won, his first win. I used to love races on a Saturday. I still think we should go back to them actually quite often. I know that it's not commercially viable, but the Vegas thing effectively Sunday for all the Europe and Asia. But the Saturday thing's interesting, isn't it? Anyway, going back to South Africa, Alex Blignort, Kyalami, race on a Saturday, and then the Alex Blignort barbecue on the Sunday was one of the great Grand Prix events of the season. Most of the drivers were there, and it was Alex's house, and you'd talk motor racing and South Africa and sport, and it was just a wonderful time. And Alex was one of these guys that never he never put up with second best. He was just a perfectionist, I think. A tough guy, but typical South African, but he was very, very good at what he did. I mean, personally, I got to say that I grew up in Australia, and my home circuit was Warwick Farm. I was lucky enough to work experience, if you like, in school holidays at the Australian Automobile Racing Club in Sydney, which ran Warwick Farm, and it was all created by Jeffrey Sykes, who was a genius, I think, in terms of race organisation. And he grew up in the days of Aintree under John Morgan, the British Automobile Racing Club, and had been very much involved with that. And because Aintree crossed over the horse race track, and there was talk now of the Australian Jockey Club, Warwick Farm in Sydney, building a motor racing circuit, Jeff was the ideal person to go out and design that circuit and then promote it and run the races there. And whether it was Sterling Moss, whether it was Jack Brabham, Jim Clark, Denny Hulme, Chris Amon, all of them said that Warwick Farm was as well run, if not better run, than any international race anywhere in the world. And I was very lucky to grow up in that environment. And so Jeff Sykes, for me, is still the best of all the race promoters that have ever walked the planet Earth. There you go. Jeffrey Sykes. Wonderful man. Sebastian Simeon. Interesting question. I think I just saw one glimpse of what it was about. Sebastian Simeon. Heikki Kovalainen said that Lewis's style, at least back in 08-09, was about braking late and deep, turning the car sharp V-line and getting a straight exit. Has Lewis changed his style, or is Heikki wrong? I've never seen Lewis never ever seen Lewis doing what Vettel does or Jean Alesi did, or to some extent what Fernando was doing in Brazil. Lewis is always, when Lewis isn't doing what he's doing at the moment, which is basically braking more in a straight line than he normally does and going in a little bit wider, I think just to try to make sure he's not getting the tyres into any sort of trouble because they're so on the edge of the operating window. When he's not doing that and he's driving like Lewis, he's always got a beautiful curve into a short corner, always. I've never seen him try to straighten that, ever. It's always just, you can just see that it's almost like a spring effect on the right front going into a left-hander that Lewis creates going into the corner. Very like Max now with a really well-balanced Red Bull. And so, I don't know what, I mean, Heikki, I think what Heikki probably, I don't think Heikki at that time, in 08-09, I think he was aware that Lewis was driving very differently to the way he drove the car. And because Lewis was going into the corner earlier, short corners, the only thing Heikki could imagine was that he was going in a pretty straight line and then doing a V turn in the middle of the corner at very low speed, minimum speed. But he wasn't doing that. He was actually shortening the corner and getting a very long extension of the exit straight as well. He was doing a beautiful corner, and I think that was because Hickey was consistently not as consistent as Lewis under braking in terms of finding the right braking area on the car, and so I think that's the way Hickey put it together in his own mind. Because as I say, today, if somebody like Yuki Tsunoda, if you ask him about the way Lewis drives, even though he followed Lewis for quite a long time in Brazil, he'd either say the same thing, or he would, I don't know what he would, I mean, he certainly wouldn't say, oh, Lewis has got beautiful short corners and he's incredible rates of input, something I really need to aspire to, and I know I can make it if I work hard enough at it. He'd never say that. He'd say, oh no, Lewis doesn't. And I think that's what you're seeing here with Hickey, to be honest. And I remember once when Rob actually was commissioned by McLaren to do some work, it was around the development of their simulator, based on brake traces from Lewis and Hickey, and Rob was looking at them with the engineers, and he was seeing things that the engineers weren't, and he was saying, well, why is it that Lewis here actually is braking a bit earlier than Hickey, and yet he's got more speed on the exit of the corner? What's happening here? And they were saying, oh, well, maybe, and no real explanation. And Rob was saying, well, what's actually going on here is that Lewis is actually braking to a completely different point to Hickey, and you can see he's got a much shorter corner, and he's given himself a much longer straight as well on which to accelerate, and he's actually made the whole corner shorter, and he's not braking late in order to do that. And I remember saying to Hickey, it was at Hockenheim, I think, I said, there's some interesting stuff going on with the telemetry analysis, and maybe might be worth having a word to Rob, or maybe coming up to Rob and just sort of discussing, because I'm sure he might be able to give you a bit of insight there on what's going on. He said, oh no, I don't need to do that. I brake later than Lewis anyway, so there's nothing I need to do in that area. I remember him saying that. So, that's why I'm a bit sort of, what am I don't know, harsh maybe in analysing what that says there, because I don't think Hickey's right. I don't think Lewis has ever driven with a V, ever. I think everything is curved with Lewis, everything. That's what makes him so good. Right, another one here. What time is it anyway? 20 past. It's the 2-hour mark. It's already come up. I mean, the bonus, 5 minutes bonus already. Rob B. Alonso at Red Bull would be so exciting. Do you think if Alonso would go there, would Max welcome the challenge to prove himself as being one, if not the best of all time, by beating Alonso H2H, head to head? Well, I think if you asked a straight question to Max Verstappen, would you be afraid to have Alonso in the other car? Of course he's going to say, no, of course I wouldn't be afraid. I'd welcome it. Of course what he'd say. But then when they go into the meeting room with Helmut and Christian and a few others, and they would say, do you really want to have Alonso in the other car? Look what he did at Ferrari when he was there. Blew the team apart. Massa ended up, hating him, or not hating him, but thinking he was very disruptive to the team. And we've seen it time and again at Renault and other places. And it's just all he's going to do is tear the team apart. So they'd all say, no, we don't want that. And so Max, of course, would agree with them, because I genuinely think Max is not afraid to take on anyone. But I also think he knows correctly that winning a world championship is unbelievably difficult. It may look very easy right now, but next year it may be much, much tighter for Red Bull, and they're going to need every bit of resource they've got to put behind Max, potentially, possibly, to win a championship. And the last thing they need is Alonso in the other car going in another direction or doing what he does. So as I said before, I don't think that'll ever happen. And I have to say, when Alonso didn't get the Red Bull drive when he left Ferrari, why is it that all the people who are now saying, oh, I'd love to see Alonso at Red Bull, where were they then? Why were they not saying, this is a disgrace, we're going to, what's Bernie Ecclestone doing, not allowing Alonso to go to Red Bull? Why hasn't he got Alonso in a Red Bull? It'd be much better for... I don't remember anybody saying that. I don't remember any clamouring from the crowd at all. They all seem to have just discovered Alonso in the last year or something, or half year. And so that's part of the problem. Alonso himself absolutely, I'm sure, was convinced that if he made a stand at Ferrari and said it's either this or I'm out, and they said, okay, you're out, I'm sure he felt that 100% he was going to replace Vettel at Red Bull. And it didn't happen. Red Bull never phoned him. So what are the fans, where are all these fans, these Alonso fans, what did they do then? I don't remember a massive clamouring then. That's one point. But the other point is Red Bull have had the opportunity to sign Alonso and they didn't. And now they got Max, who's dominating the team in a way that no driver ever dominates a team apart from Michael at Ferrari, really, or Jackie Stewart at Tyrrell, or Nicky maybe in his Ferrari years, or Lewis at Mercedes, I guess you got to say. There's no way they're going to dilute that, I think, by putting Alonso in the car. It's too late. People should have tried to get him in the car before Red Bull became the force that they are now. It would have been much more effective if Alonso had gone to Red Bull then, and we would have had many better years of Formula One from then on. But there didn't seem to be any inertia. Nobody seemed to be giving Bernie a hard time, and he was still in a powerful position then to move drivers around and influence teams. Nobody was putting pressure on Bernie to say, why isn't Alonso in a Red Bull? And that opportunity's gone now, I think. Strange. So, another question. This is... it's about McLaren, I think. Eli Zegib. Hi, Peter. Do you think McLaren will maintain their form into 24 given their early season struggle 2021, 22, 23? They usually start on the back foot, and Red Bull shifted focus to 24 long ago. Yeah, I think they will. And I think they will because the regulations aren't changing. And the reason they were on the back foot 21, 22, 23 is they didn't really know where they were going with the car or what they were doing with the car. Well, 22, 20, yeah, in the whole ground effect thing. They never really anticipated the porpoising issues. Now, I'm not saying that they've got the building blocks that Red Bull have got in order to be able to know exactly where to go next with the car, but they've got a better feel for what to do with the car and where to go with the car than any of the other teams apart from Red Bull. And because of that, I think they will be, and because the regulations aren't changing till 2026, I think they will be good from the start next year. And I think they will be a potential major threat to Red Bull. I think right now, it's inconceivable that Red Bull, anybody at Red Bull high up, is not thinking McLaren could be a potential threat, big threat to us next year. For sure they're thinking that. So, from the point of view of it being a close year, let's hope that happens. Right, another one. Good evening, Peter. Thanks for producing great content. Thank you very much. It wasn't very great tonight, I don't think. Apologies for all the technical glitches. How strong do you think Aston Martin will be early next year? A bit difficult to predict, isn't it? They're a bit up and down. As I say, they go from Alonso pulling out of Mexico because he can't drive the car and suddenly finishing P3 in Brazil. I'm assuming, with good people there as they have, and all the facilities that are coming on stream as they are, that they will do very well from the start of next year. Whether they'll be quite as good as McLaren, I don't know. I think they'll be really good. And I think it's hard to imagine at this stage the factory Mercedes team blowing away McLaren and Aston Martin next year. hopefully the factory Mercs will be, Red Bull copies or whatever, and they'll be right there. But yeah, I think I can't imagine why Aston Martin wouldn't be. I mean, they obviously understand the car less than McLaren. I think McLaren have got a better all-round feel for where they're going with the car now than Aston Martin have, and I think they. What do I think then? I think in terms of facilities and where they're going, I think much of a muchness really where Aston Martin are now with the money that the Strolls have put in with the new factory and everything else, and McLaren with the new wind tunnel, it's pretty much on a par. And so going to be an interesting race between them. So another one. So many questions. Thank you very much for all these questions, everybody. I mean, it's you guys that make the show, not me. And I'm just lucky to be in a position to chat through some of these points. Frag Dude. Good name. Given that Vegas is a brand new track for all drivers, is there anything we could watch out for that would be telling about the style difference between drivers and the package each team is fielding? Just as a reminder, let's go back to the Vegas circuit. Hairpin, then looks like a reasonably good right-hander. Third gear, it says second, third, fourth. So it's not that quick. It looks like they're accelerating there, so it's not really a corner where you get a quick driver is going to be able to do anything different. It's a bit like that long right-hander in Austin. You're just accelerating through it. Fourth, fifth. Oh no, sorry, these are turns. What am I talking about? Okay. Stupid, dumb. Okay, turn 1, turn 2, 3. Okay, so I don't know. I don't know what radius that is and how good that is. It looks like that could be, hopefully, quite a good corner, that right-hander. And they go into this corner here, which is a 90-degree right. Won't be too much you can do there, apart from high-speed braking and accuracy. Chicane here, this left-hander. That could be, turn 6 to 7 could be a place where you'll see drivers who can manage the dynamic weight very well and be braking while they're turning still, and you might see some really good short corner stuff there going on from the good guys. That looks quite a good little bit of road. The next bit looks a bit boring, and then that kink looks flat. This right-hander here, left-hander here, turn 12, probably fairly line-locked, I would imagine. Not much you could do there. Would require some braking, not massive high-speed braking, and then high-speed braking into 14, you've got another chicane. So I'd say there's one corner there which is quite discerning. That one where they're braking into the chicane, a little bit like the one in Baku near the end of the lap when they come around that left-hander and they brake into the tight right. So that's a good corner. The rest of it, I think the package each team is fielding, it's all going to be about getting the soft tyre to work. And it's either going to be getting it up to temperature in the case of the hard tyre within the soft range, the hard and the medium, or it's going to be controlling the soft as it's going off in the lap and getting a full lap out of it in qualifying, depending on the ambient, depending on the track conditions. Ride height, I imagine most teams are going there with relatively high ride height because it's a new circuit. Of course, they can look at the asphalt and get a feel for the abrasion and bumps and so forth, but there's nothing like actually being at the track in order to feel all of that. And so because it's a first race, I would imagine that everyone will go there relatively high ride height. It's not a sprint weekend, so they can go. I don't think it's a sprint weekend, is it? So they can go. They can modify the car a bit, but I imagine it will be where they'll be going. Let me just check that. I never. The problem with me is I'm so ambivalent about sprint races that I never really watch. I just try not to think about them, so I never really know when they're going to happen. I'm pretty sure the last sprint race is Abu Dhabi, is it not? Let me just check. Vegas is just ordinary practice. And no, they're both. No, we've had all the sprints. Okay, that's good. They're both ordinary races now. Good. I think it'll be whoever can run as low as they can to get away with it. It's bound to be bumpy. And when you've got high-speed braking, it's always about making the car as stable as possible as well. And if the circuit is quite bumpy, it's going to be really difficult under high-speed braking. So that'll be one of the telling factors. And then top speed as well. Who can have a significant advantage in top speed? Because if there are tyre issues, either too soft, too hard, whatever it is, then if you can make up for that with a 4 to 5 kilometre advantage and top speed, then you've got a lot of the lap sorted, haven't you? So top speed will be something that's really, I think, is the most interesting thing. It'll be to compare top speeds throughout the Friday and the Saturday, or was it the Thursday and the Friday, to see who's got that sort of advantage. And that will show through as the race weekend progresses, I think. Also, of course, being a brand new track, it's going to pick up grip very quickly, and the track on Sunday, midway through the race, is going to be completely different to the track that they begin with on Thursday. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge in that sense, I suppose. Oops, what's happened here? Yeah, somebody's kind of agreed, I think, with what I just said. Maybe, I don't know. Let's have a look. degC, track temperatures will be interesting. Advantage Ferrari in qualifying perhaps, though I think they will grain their tyres massively over a race stint. Give them a chance. So yeah, they did a good job, didn't they, at Monza and in Singapore. When, Singapore, as I predicted before Singapore, with those longish straights, emphasis on high-speed braking again, that if you got that, you've got quite a lot of the Singapore lap sorted. And it could well be the same in Vegas. And they did a pretty good job. I mean, once you've got in front, and if you've got a top speed advantage and you're on the pole or the front row, in theory, you should be able to, sustain that in terms of not being that easy to pass on the basis you have got a top speed advantage. But however, DRS can enable a slower car, obviously in P3, to do something and maybe to manage its tyres. But then again, you actually use the tyres more if you're following a car than if you're in clear air. So yeah, interesting. We'll see. Good points, all. So, what's this one? Right, I'm going to have to peg it in soon. I say peg it in. I often say that to Jack when he's hitting golf balls, practicing golf balls. Oh, sorry, I didn't copy that. Because when I came over to England in 1971, one of the things I did was go to as many circuits as I could. It was midwinter, freezing cold. I had a Vauxhall VX 490, which I bought from Keith Holland for about 30 quid. Wasn't a bad car, actually. Didn't give me any trouble. Keith Holland, very underrated driver, I think. So now I'm just trying to get this thing. Here we go. I got to Goodwood, freezing cold Goodwood, and John Surtees was there testing his Formula One car. Can you believe it? 71. And so I sort of stood in the pits nearby. And I remember Surtees stopped running. It was about half an hour to go. It was about 4:30, and it was getting cold and a bit dark. And I remember he got out of the car and something had happened. And he said, the spigot's gone into the camshaft. I think we can pack it in now. So I've often thought, spigot's gone on the camshaft. I'm going to pack it in. I'm going to pack it in now. Carl Jeevers, again, at power sliding. So what? That's what happens in motorsports. And McLaren just did it better. Oh, you're responding to somebody. Okay. After all that, there was I thinking that you were going to be talking about power sliding. Silly me. Power sliding. I mean, was it Gilles Villeneuve? Never said it to me. He said it to Nigel Roebuck. He said, there's got to be something wrong in a sport when it's slow when you're going sideways. Okay, here's an interesting question. A little bit, I think, along the lines of my let's have a B division championship for all the good young guys that aren't in Formula One in last year's Formula One cars. This is quite a good idea, actually. It's probably better than my idea. It's probably more practical. Let's have a look. Jeremy Gorman, Peter, what do you think about shifting sprints into using spec Formula cars, in other words, Dalaras, maybe even teaming with Formula 2 teams for machinery? Yeah, a lot of good Formula 2 teams that will never make it to Formula 1 because of the whole closed shop business. Then you would see drivers on even terms. Points count only for driver points. Yeah, but it'll never happen, will it? You'll never have Toto Wolff agreeing to let his 2 drivers appear in a Dallara powered. What engines are they going to use for a start? Powered by whatever, So that will never happen, sadly. My idea, I think, is a better one because you have this B Division World Championship. It's all last year's Formula 1 cars or 2 years old or whatever it is. Because a lot of the young guys now, the Liam Lawsons, the Oscar Piastris, etc., test older year-old cars. That's what's going on with, a lot of the teams do that. So why not use those cars in their own championship with these young drivers at racetracks different from the Formula One calendar in countries that want to be in Formula One, like South Africa, Colombia, Argentina, all these countries, New Zealand, Vietnam, India. You could put a great championship together. What you wouldn't call it the B division. You obviously have a better name for it. Have its own TV rights, and they're in 2-year-old Formula One cars. All the young guys, and I think that would be great. There's too many good young talented drivers sitting around doing nothing. And I was interested to see that, quite justifiably so, Mick Schumacher has decided not to do Formula E. Quite right. He wants to make it in Formula One, and he wants to keep those options open. So here's Ronnie Front. I might have to make this the last one, if only because it's probably it's one of the questions I don't know the answer to, and so at that point I probably need to sign off. What's the explanation for AlphaTauri's sudden improvement in pace? Ronnie Front. Well, the explanation is nobody knows. And it's the reason Aston Martin went from nowhere to P3 in between Mexico and Brazil. Probably find in Vegas they'll be very slow again. It is. I mean, the ground effect era is really difficult to manage the car, the sweet spot of the car, the tyres it's all to do with getting the tyres to work and having the right ride heights, the right amount of downforce without bottoming out, and to have a decent. They've been quick on the straight in both Mexico and Brazil. That's one thing, but they haven't lost in terms of grip on the corners, which is really impressive. Jonathan Eddles, my mate, ex-Williams. Probably all his credit should all go to Jonathan. I'm only joking. Some really good guys at AlphaTauri. I've always rated them very highly, and always surprised they haven't done better actually. So good to see. I wish I could say, oh well, it's because of this gizmo they put under the car that does that, but I don't believe any of the. If they've got very good aero sweet spot now, I don't think there's anything you can see visually that would explain that. It would be definitely something in the floor area that would be in explanation. But yeah, they're quick on the straight and they're very good in terms of grip on corners, slow and fast. Impressive. Maybe it's all Daniel Ricciardo, all that sim work he did while he was getting his wrist up to square one again. Maybe it was Liam Lawson's input. Liam sorted it all out. Could be any number of reasons. Here's somebody saying they agree with me. Good. About this championship. I think he's got a better name for it than me as well. Let's have a look. Yeah, I prefer, this is Death destruction. Yeah, I prefer a Formula 1.5, a separate bridge for reserve drivers and newcomers, which should also be beneficial to the reserve drivers. Yeah, do it. You see, they won't do it. I tell you why they won't do it, because they'd be too afraid that it'll affect the current World Championship. And if there's a sponsor out there that might want to be a title sponsor of this, then it should be in Formula One. But my counter to that would be, if you've got two beer companies, you've got Heineken in Formula One, you've got another beer company wants to be in Formula One, but they can't because of Heineken, they can do the other championship. So it's actually a really good thing. I wish it would gather some momentum. Phoenix Flacos, in responding to about why the AlphaTauri is good, they're saying that they let Yuki curse at the car all week and shame it into being faster. One thing I've got to say about, remember in the last live stream I was going on about how the great days of Macau. And of course there is the World Cup. I should have pointed that out. There is the World Cup at Macau coming up, the FIA Formula 3 World Cup. But what I said basically still stands, and that is that in order for these big FIA Formula 3 cars to race at Macau, they have to race with a fixed wing setting and a speed limiter, because otherwise they're deemed to be too dangerous and too quick on the straight. And that completely defeats, in my view, the beauty of that lovely slippery Macau thing where you had all that slipstreaming and lovely stuff going on with those beautiful Euro F3 cars. And now it's all a bit artificial. That's what I should have added to it. So yes, it's good that a lot of quick drivers are going back to Macau in Formula 3, but for me this still isn't the Formula 3 at Macau that I know and love and will love to see again. The Desert Kiwi says, haha, Peter, New Zealand, a third world country. I think that's probably in reference to me saying put New Zealand in there as a B division championship. But no, I mean, I'd love to see New Zealand in the World Championship, of course, but it's not. So let's at least have a second division Formula 1. I'm kind of at the end now, I think. Quite a lot of stuff, but Carl Givers says short corners may lead to dire straits for the t-shirt. I can do them cheap in South Africa, rands. Oh well, we're going to have to do that, aren't we? Okay, there we are. Let me just see if there's anything I haven't put up. All my special pictures. Don't forget that calendar. Here's the picture of Lewis, 2018, Brazil. It's a beautiful photograph, that, isn't it? Beautiful. Carlos Pache, Vegas. Yeah, we did it. Oh, the only other thing I didn't put that up was the Pirelli compounds. You probably know all this, but they've released the compounds for these last two races, and they're the softest in the range. You see Vegas and Abu Dhabi right at the bottom there, which means they are the same as Mexico, Singapore, Italy. That's another interesting thing. Same as Monza. Ferrari good at Monza. Singapore, Ferrari good at Singapore. Now they've got that same tyre again. Mexico, Ferrari were good. And here they are, the last two on that softest in the range. And also Vegas, a circuit in which they won't be running a massive amount of downforce. So again, got to say Ferrari should be looking quite good, assuming they can get through all their unreliability issues, which they've got a sort of 10-day hiatus between Brazil and Vegas to do that. So there we are. Thank you very much. I've got death and destruction up there, but I just sort of put that down. I'm going to do how about this? How's this for coolness? Yeah, there you go. Thanks for watching. And I mean it. Thanks, everybody. I'll make it a bit bigger. There you go. Yeah. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being a part of it. It's now, whatever it is, 10 to 11 where I am, CET. 10 to 10 in England, and I don't know where you are in the world, but wherever you are, thanks for staying up if you did. And if you didn't, I hope you're enjoying the replay, and we got rid of all the glitches somehow, and it's been relatively listenable too, if that's the right phraseology. And I'll do another one of these fairly soon. Not quite sure when. try and give you a bit of notice if I can. But come what may, of course, we'll do the 3 videos from Vegas and then from Abu Dhabi. It's a double header, isn't it? I think, yeah. And so thank you for watching. I better just check if it is a double header. I keep saying these things. Again, I never really look at the calendar very much. I don't look at the calendar. I don't look at the sprints. I just see what's next, and that's it. But better just check. So Abu Dhabi is on... doesn't actually have the date on this thing here I'm looking at. I don't know. Anyway, it's Vegas and then Abu Dhabi. And I'll be trying to do another live stream early next week, I guess. It'd probably be the best plan. Although I've got to do this trip next week, so it may be difficult to do another live stream before then. We'll wait and see. I'll try and do one. Can't promise it, but if I do, I'll try and give you as much notice as I can. Thanks for watching. Take care.